Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. It's Lorbai or Maddie, and today I am reading chapter 14 of #Murder Trending by Gretchen McNeil. I do want to say that chapter 13 was crazy. They're definitely starting to set it up to make Dee believe that Gucci Hangman is her stepsister's killer. They're definitely setting it up. But let's get on to chapter 14. Dee continued to see the image of the bloody heart long after it disappeared from the screen. The main video feed was showing a slow-mo replay of Blair's final moments, pausing at key intervals to add pop-up arrows and snarky commentary. Pause. This is gonna smart. That sentence doesn't make any sense. This is gonna smart with an arrow pointing to one of the kettlebells as it was released from its basket. Pause. Another brutal killer bites the dust. Pause. I hope you like a tight fit as the noose begins to tighten. Pause. Airball as Blair's head catapulted through the air. Millions of people were viewing the postman's replay, and their comments flooded the sidebar. #airball was instantly popular, followed closely by #decapitation and #OBE or #out-of-body experience. And the spikes tally rose exponentially: 90,000, 500,000, 1 million. What about Blair's viewership rule? Weren't ratings supposed to be higher in the evening? This was mid-morning, and Blair's murder had racked up 1 million spikes within minutes. But while a small nugget in the back of her brain was registering these facts, the heart carving was all-consuming. It wasn't a coincidence. Dee rejected that possibility out of hand. Etching a heart into the flesh of a dead woman's shoulder. Okay, not totally out of realm of possibility for one of the Paniacs, but needlepoint tweezers, pink with white polka dots. Was Gucci trying to send Dee a message? That was her initial reaction, but there was no way Gucci could have known about her finding the tweezers, which left only one option. Had Gucci Hangman killed Monica? It made no sense. Mo Betta Styles was one of Gucci's biggest fans, probably adding to his merchandise sales through her following. So why would he kill her? Besides, the postman's killers didn't murder outside of Alcatraz 2.0 for fear of winding up as inmates themselves. Maybe the tweezers were a coincidence, and Gucci was using the heart to tell Dee that she would be the next one to die. The marking on Monica's body was public record, so it was almost plausible. Dee staggered over to a table, knees wobbly and unsure, and sat down. Shit. The first time it's someone you know, Niles said, gently pulling out the chair beside her, is always the hardest to watch. At least she didn't suffer. Oh yeah, Griselda said, her voice as sharp as glass. I'm sure she didn't feel a fucking thing when her head was ripped out of her spine. Off her spine, Niles corrected. Technically, the vertebral column ends at the atlas or C1 vertebrae, which forms the joint connecting the skull to the spine. Although he squinted at the screen, taking a closer look at the freeze frame on the bones protruding from the gory stump that used to be Blair's neck, although it appears that the C3 or C4 is still attached, which would mean that at least some of the traditional spine was in fact removed with Blair's head. So I supposed in some regard your description was accurate. He turned back to Dee. I was pre-med at Stanford. Griselda stared at him blankly. Why do I talk to you? The point, Niles said, resuming his bedside manner, is that the first one you watch is always the worst. It gets easier. Easier? Was Dee supposed to find comfort in the fact that eventually she would get used to watching someone she knew get decapitated in front of a live audience? It shouldn't. I'm so glad you're here to tell us these things, Griselda cried, clasping her hands together in mock excitement. We really need Princess's morale superiority to point out what horrible bitches we've become. Gris, Niles began. She didn't mean, shut up, Niles, she snapped. Just because you've shoved your tongue down her throat doesn't mean you can make excuses for her. Like somehow I don't care that Blair's dead because I'm not pale and trembling and ready to pass out. Griselda's words implied that she was truly broken up about Blair's death, and yet she didn't seem to be affected at all. Even Niles was paler than usual, but Griselda's voice was steady, her breathing normal, and her entire demeanor was calm. It was either the greatest display of self-control Dee had ever seen, or she wasn't really bothered by what she just witnessed. Besides, Griselda continued, narrowing her eyes, Princess should be upset. She's probably the reason Blair got killed in the first place. Gris! Niles' voice was sharp, but hardly above a whisper. Dee caught her breath. What do you mean? Blair flew under the radar for months, Griselda said with a shrug. Then you show up, she's nice to you, and boom, dead within 24 hours. Now, Gris, you're being ridiculous. Niles stood up, gingerly shifting his body weight back and forth between his feet as if the floor of ice cream were skewn with red-hot coals. How? Griselda countered. Because I'm picking on your new girlfriend? Niles and Griselda bickered, but the voices faded into the background. Could Dee actually have caused Blair's death? She thought of Mira, who clearly wanted nothing to do with her, of Rodrigo the molester, who had been ready to get busy until he realized who she was, and the other inmates hurrying by on their way to work, all avoiding all contact. Griselda was right. Sure, Gucci could have carved that heart into anyone's shoulder, but he just so happened to choose someone with whom Dee had established a connection. This was Cinderella's survivor's fault. Her and her 20 million spikes. Blair's death was on Dee's head, just like Monica's. I'll kill you and everyone you love. In an instant, Dee was 11 years old again, back in that white doorless room, trying desperately to figure out what the girl in the vent wanted from her, trying to guess what answers would keep her alive. Why was this happening? Is it something I did? Is it my fault? There were secrets Kumi had shared that V had never revealed to anyone, not even the police. She had been too terrified. If you ever tell anyone, Kumi had said, I'll kill you and everyone you love. Promise me you won't tell. Promise! And so Dee had kept her mouth shut about the secrets of the White Room for 6 years until she had broken down and shared them with someone, Monica. 2 weeks later, she was dead. Was the pattern repeating itself? The last time Dee had trusted someone, that someone had ended up dead, strangled on the floor of her bedroom with a heart carved into her shoulder. Why was this happening? Is it my fault? Monica wouldn't have been Dee's first choice of stepsister. They were nothing alike. Dee was dark and jaded, and though her dad had kept her in therapy for years after her abduction, it hadn't seemed to do much good. She had shied away from personal relationships, finding it too difficult to trust anyone. Somewhere along the line, Dee had stopped blaming herself for the abduction and started blaming everyone else, strangers, friends, maybe even her dad. During the 3 years since her kidnapping, her anger had simmered, waiting to explode, and Dee had isolated herself from her peers, unwilling to let anyone inside. She'd eat lunch alone in the library, scribbling poems into her notebook, just as she had when she was a kid. Back then, her compositions were about the great sadness of her young life, the loneliness of being an only child. She even had one of them published in the local paper. My heart wants a sibling, a friend to call my own, but I don't know what it means to have a sister or a clone. But that was before the White Room. After Dee's poems reflected the darkness and panic that plagued her, which she feared would haunt her forever. Monica was the exact opposite, perky and lighthearted. Nothing seemed to bother her. They had been in the same class together since 6th grade. When Dee and her dad had moved to Burbank and assumed new names, when their parents started dating 2 years later and then got serious, Dee vowed that she and Monica would never be friends, although Monica never got that memo. After they'd all moved in together their freshman year of high school, Dee made it clear at every meeting, whether brushing teeth side by side or in their Jack and Jill bathroom, or eating meals across the table from each other, that they were not and would never be friends. And every single time, Monica flashed her kind, warm smile and tried again. It had taken a year, but Dee had finally relented. They bonded over something totally unexpected, a book. Dee read vicariously. An escape from her life and her memories and her decisions. But she had never seen Monica pick up a book that wasn't required reading for school. Then one day, Dee was reading Jane Eyre for the umpteenth time. Monica walked in and said, "I love Mr. Roster." "You've read Jane Eyre?" Dee asked. Monica flashed her warm smile. "Of course, I love a good romance about broken people. Dee had never quite understood why she loved that book, but those two words encapsulated it perfectly. Suddenly, it was as if the floodgates had opened. Every human interaction that Dee had avoided since her days in the White Room came rushing back tenfold. She wanted Monica's friendship, her approval, her input, and being friends with Monica led to hanging out with Monica's friends, and by the end of sophomore year, Dee had a circle, a community, and for the first time in years, she participated in activities at school. She even contributed a few of her poems to her high school's literary magazine, and then one day the inevitable. Dee told Monica Kiyomi's secret. They had been hanging out by the pool in the backyard, enjoying the late Southern California summer, when Monica asked Dee about her kidnapping. Just like that, out of the blue. They've never talked about it before, and Monica's question caught Dee off guard. It wasn't the first time she'd told the story. Detectives had heard it. Psychologists had heard it. Her dad. But those hadn't been voluntary. Monica was the first person who heard everything. Dee told Monica about waking up in the White Room, about meeting Kiyomi, who she initially thought was a prisoner like herself. Eventually, Dee realized that Kiyomi was her abductor, the one holding her there for her own amusement. It had been strange to Dee that a teenager could be so vicious, but then Kiyomi talked about her father, and then Dee understood her dad. Dee began, her heart pounding in her chest as she related the secret of the White Room to Monica. I'll kill everyone you love. Yeah? Dee swallowed down her own fear. Kiyomi was locked away. It was time to unburden herself. That room she kept me in. Kiyomi said that her dad had killed people in there many times. She knew because she had watched a lot of them from the vent. She said he'd made the room white because he liked the way the blood looked when it spilled onto the white floor. It felt good to tell someone after all those years, the final weight of her trauma removed. She was just trying to scare you, Monica had smiled. I'm sure no one ever died in the White Room. Yeah, Dee had said. You're probably right. But at the time of Dee's escape, Kiyomi's threat had felt overwhelming, and even though she had been sent off to a mental hospital for an indeterminate period of confinement, Dee had always felt as though Kiyomi would follow through on her threat if Dee had ever told anyone about the room. Still, Dee had never seen Kiyomi's dad during her imprisonment, so maybe Monica was right, and Kiyomi had made up the story to terrorize her victim. But what if it was the truth? What if by not telling anyone, Dee had ensured that Kiyomi's dad was never arrested and more people died in the White Room? Guilt had eaten away at her for years, finally overcoming her fear. And so she told someone she trusted, and in the blink of an eye, Monica was dead, and Dee was on trial for her murder. Dee pushed her childhood fears aside. Kiyomi was not responsible for Monica's death, but now Dee was convinced that Gucci Hangman, or whoever he was in the real world, was connected to her stepsister's murder. She just needed a way to prove it. Griselda's right, Dee said, cutting into Niall and Griselda's steady stream of bickering. About what? Griselda asked, eyebrow arched. That you raided a kindergarten closet when you got dressed this morning, or that you're the root of all evil? Neither? Blair, it's my fault. I think she was killed because of my... Again, from out of nowhere, Niall swooped in. He cupped her face in his hands and planted his lips on hers. Now you're just doing it on purpose, Griselda whispered as Niles broke away. Before Dee could answer, Ethan barreled through the door, throwing it open with his beefy arms. Dude, I'm sorry about Blair. Griselda tried to act like nothing bothered her. Why? Did you kill her? No. Ethan tilted his head to the side. But you guys were friends and shit, right? Friends die, she said plainly. That's how it is here. Again, not an ounce of real feeling Not an ounce of real feeling perpetuated her mask. Ethan hoisted himself up on the counter and reached out to take her hand. I know you're sad on the inside. Sad for you, she retorted. Ethan beamed at her, as if Griselda had just given him the loveliest compliment in the world, and for a moment Dee was jealous of his ability to find happiness in just about anything. Meanwhile, Niles eyed Dee closely. Gris, he said, at last, holding his debit card out to her. I'm in the mood for a milkshake. One of your special creations. One for Dee, too. Would you mind? Seriously? Griselda asked. He tossed his debit card onto the counter. I'm afraid so. She sighed heavily as she had just been asked to do as if she'd just been asked to do a chore she loathed, and then smacked Ethan on the arm. Get me a bag of ice from the freezer. Well, Ethan bounded off to the back room like a puppy excited to be tossed a bone. Griselda snatched Niles' card and stomped around behind the counter, slamming cupboard doors and cooler windows as she gathered ingredients: chocolate syrup, vanilla ice cream, bananas. Niles continued to smile, his enormous teeth fully exposed. The grin looked as if it was plastered on his face, held there by an elaborate concoction of duct tape and staples. You're going to love this, he said, his cheeks twitching with the effort to keep smiling. I promise. Dee had no idea why, but clearly Niles wanted her to play along, to keep her conversation light and generic and absolutely devoid of questions or explanations like the one she had been about to give when he kissed her. Again. I'm sure I will, she said slowly. Ethan returned, a heavy bag of ice slung over one shoulder. He deposited it in the sink behind the counter. Griselda proceeded to grab a handful of cubes and dump them into the industrial-sized blender. It was a lot of ice, more than the ratio of ice cream, syrup, and fruit necessitated. And when she slapped on the lid and fired up the blender, the grinding of the blades against the ice filled the entire shop with a deafening roar, which was apparently what Niles had wanted. The instant the noise flooded her ears, he leaned forward, his breath hot on her cheek, and whispered just loud enough for her to hear over the din. Tell me why Blair was killed. And that is the end of chapter 14. There was no comments for this chapter, but hopefully I think I have a theory. Anytime they're not being necessarily heard or watched, I guess, I think that's when the comments aren't at the end of the chapter. I'm connecting the dots over here. I'm a little slow sometimes, but I'm connecting the dots. So that's the end of chapter 14. I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.